Hey folks, how you doing? Let's get the camera down to a regular position here, yeah? Okay. A little live improv to start the night off. So we're talking about creativity, so start with a little bit of music. Let's pull this fun little retro scanline filter off. Take a minute to do that. Watch this. Here we go. Still have like some of the drone track going here. I'll let that run for a minute. The old guitar up so we can talk a little bit. Today we're going to talk a little bit about inspiration. What the heck is inspiration? People view it as magic. I don't view creativity as magic. I have a little bit different view of it. So that includes inspiration. I find that what inspires most people are two kind of things that point towards novelty. The first one's really synthesis, like combining two things, and the other one is inversion and recontextualization of, I guess that's three things. Recontextualization of previously existing ideas and concepts, and the third one would be inversion. So I'll talk about those three ideas and how they kind of end up becoming art. There was a Rick Beato interview of David Gilmour pretty recently that I would just recommend everybody check out. Even if you're not a big David Gilmour fan or you don't like Pink Floyd, Rick Beato, it's apparent to me how bad most artist interviews were like 30 years ago when I see Rick Beato do something, because he is so much better. He's so much better about talking to musicians than what we dealt with the press like 30 years ago. If this had been 30 years ago, it would have been some guy, maybe from MTV, maybe from like 60 Minutes or something, who knows nothing about music, asking him about like whatever things he could think of. Why aren't you still working with Roger Glover? We would probably get like 20 questions, and it would just annoy the crap out of Gilmour. Instead, Rick Beato talks about like how do you compose the music? What equipment do you use? Like, how do you set things up? How do you come up with ideas? How do you develop them? Why, let's listen to this song. What did you do in this song? And where does your inspiration for this kind of stuff come from? And so he talks about what I really think of as creative inspiration quite a bit in that interview. And the big takeaway about what creative inspiration is that it really starts with an idea. And so that's kind of how I defined it in the very first stream. The inspiration is the idea. That's the seed from which the tree grows. So David Gilmour will go through and he'll just be improvising all the time. He's improvising and just playing and trying out new ideas. And when he hits one that he thinks that there's something to it, he starts to develop it. And then the development is where you're exercising all the other things, the will, where you're practicing and you are coming up with variations. You're figuring out how that idea fits into a bigger context to make an entire piece. You start to do the real work, the creative work that goes into making a piece. Like I said, a lot of lay people, or maybe just people who are new, they view creativity in general, or like creation of art, as some sort of musical thing. And that is accidentally started a loop here. Hold on. That is not how I view it. I don't view creativity as a magical, mystical thing. It is in some sense, because we're spiritual beings, and so creativity is the exercise of our spirit. It's the exercise of being made in the image of God. God creates, and so we create. And most of our creation comes from the things which God has given us that we are combining in new and interesting and fun ways. But that impulse is, while I think it's divine, it's not magical, right? It's not like there's an angel beaming art into your brain and you just have to like take the right kind of drugs to be able to do it. And keep in mind, this is like David Gilmour, who's goes way back to the psychedelic era. And you're not going to hear him talk about, I had to make sure I did all my mushrooms and stuff in order to get inspired. It's like, no, we went in there, we improvised, we heard an idea we liked, we started working on it. We had lyrics. This guy contributed lyrics. He did lyrics, and he reformed some of my lyrics. And so you get to see how art's really created is not magically or mystically, but through work, effort, combining lots of ideas, trying new things out, doing real work in order to come up with a finished piece. So what is the inspiration? Inspiration's the idea. It can come from a couple places. I mentioned one. The first one is synthesis. So synthesis is where you are combining two things. So think about if you were going to synthesize flamenco and metal. There's a guy who did a metal band called Flametal, right? And so it's just a synthesis of those things. It's combining flamenco and metal, right? Right away, you can hear something that's novel. So that's a novel sound, right? We haven't heard those sounds in combination before, and so they'll strike the ear as something novel and therefore creative, new, original. But the two constituent parts that make them up are not original in themselves. They're derived from something else. And this is the way a lot of art gets made when you get down to it. It's really rare that anybody is able to do something completely original or outside the box. Rather, what they're doing is they're doing synthesis. Whoa, whoops. Stop that. All right, started playing again. No. I'm pressing a button here. That's why. All right, sorry. They're doing synthesis, they're doing inversion, or they're recontextualizing something. So, like you can look at, the famous, who did the soup cans? My gosh, why is his name falling out of my head? Super important postmodern artist. Who am I thinking of? The Campbell soup cans. Andy Warhol, right, Andy Warhol, of course. Okay. Andy Warhol, who's a Christian, by the way, he's Catholic, right? So people are like, Christians never make any art. It's like, actually, one of the biggest postmodern guys was Catholic. Why is the soup can art? Well, he's just recontextualizing the way we look at a soup can so that there is an art to the way that the soup can was made. Somebody designed the logo, somebody designed the form of the can, somebody decided how the picture of the can needs to look. So there's an art to the can, and so it's recontextualized. It's presenting something in a different context so that you are thinking about it differently. So that's the recontextualization that can be creative. And the third one is inversion. So inversion is one that a lot of people get upset about, but it's something that we do all the time, right? Like, what if the idea of an anti-hero is an inversion? Like, what if it was from the perspective of the vampire, right? Like Interview with the Vampire. Okay, so that right by itself can be very novel and very interesting. We are going to see something that maybe we've seen before, but we're seeing it from a totally new angle, and we are inverting the things that we are used to seeing to create a novel experience. And from that, we can do lots of creative work. We can do lots of new combinations of things. There's lots of new things that you can show by starting with that inspiration of, like, what if we did a book from the vampire's perspective? What if we did a book from the bad guy's perspective? What if we did a story about an evil character? Things like that. So inversion gets a lot of flack these days, but it is, I think, an important element towards creativity. And it's also, these things are also the things that drive stylistic change if you are a student of art history or music history or the history of literature. Stylistic changes from one ethos to another tend to happen through these different combinations of things. I mentioned like Flametal, but the most common synthesis that you're going to hear in metal is actually thrash, which is a synthesis of metal with punk, right? That's originally how it's described. When I listen to thrash metal, I don't really hear the punk part, but it's faster, it's more aggressive, it has a more street level delivery, the lyrical content is more like punk than something like Judas Priest or Black Sabbath or Rainbow, something that came before. So you get a different kind of mixture of things. You have synthesis with early alternative rock. What became known as alternative rock later is not really an alternative to anything, it's just mainstream rock. But REM would use different instrumentation. So like here's a rock song, but there's mandolin in it. So that is something that a unique and interesting and creative approach. Because you're using a different instrument, it has a different range, it has a different tone, you're fitting it into something that's pre-existing in terms of its established way of doing things, and that can create a lot of novel experiences as well. So just really good examples of synthesis that you can see. Sci-fi horror is a synthesis of science fiction and horror. So if you're a fan of the movie Alien, you're looking at something that's a creative synthesis. If you are a fan of The Godfather, you're actually looking at something that's a creative inversion. Okay, and The Godfather is an inversion. Rather than having it be about the bad guys trying to catch the robbers, it's about the robbers themselves. And that can be something that's really interesting. So gangster movies, cowboy movies, spaghetti westerns were an inversion of the westerns which came directly before it, which were about good guys catching robbers. Instead, you have these morally neutral, morally gray, or just bad guys catching each other, right? Bandits as the main characters. That is a kind of inversion that people really attach to. And so it becomes so popular that people now think of the original inversion of the Western with the spaghetti Western as being the default mode of the way Westerns are. Westerns are about tough, gritty, morally gray guys fighting it out in a desert landscape. It's like it wasn't actually all that way. It used to be a lot more cut and dry and more about cops or robbers or cowboys and Indians. If you go back to like the 50s, and a lot of the TV shows that showed up in the 50s had that more straight approach to it. So it's one of these interesting things. We have a whole genre of movies, gangster movies like Goodfellas and Godfather, that are about the robbers themselves. And it's kind of asking a question like, what if we did it from the perspective of the robbers, right? So someone says, Zimumaro says, it's not so much, inversion is not so much the problem as subversion. I'm not going to dig into what that means and what you mean by that, but when we're talking about creativity, we're talking about how things get inverted. And in fact, I did it with Water of Awakening, so I have that one here. So I'll talk about that one for a minute. So Water of Awakening is, in a lot of ways, about inverting a lot of fantasy tropes, right? So some basic fantasy tropes that you might see in this. Let me see, am I out of focus? I look a little out of focus. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I'm in focus. So I might be a little out of focus here. Hopefully this, yes, I was out of focus. Let's turn autofocus on. Okay, that's a little better. All right, Water of Awakening. Sorry, I was a little blurry there. Okay, Water of Awakening. This is an inversion of a lot of different fantasy tropes. Where did the inspiration for this come from? Well, the whole story kind of leapt into my mind as I was driving between Modesto and Bakersfield to see my mom, and I was driving my family down, and everybody was like asleep, and so I was completely by myself alone, and I came up with this story. This story kind of popped into my head, and it's an inversion of a lot of things. So rather than the hero being a man, the hero's a woman. That is an inversion. Like, what if we had a girl hero? Now, nowadays, that tends to take center stage, but it really is more of a more classic approach to fantasy that we're gonna have a female main character. There's actually nothing really new about that. That's been done before, like Red Sonja and all kinds of things. You have sword and sorcery women that go way back, right? It's not really new to have this, but rather than say Bilbo going off as a man, rather than Lancelot going off, it's going to be a woman. And rather than having a B story that's about love, right, which I have in the book that I'm currently writing on stream, it is she's already married, right? So she's already married, and she's going to save her husband. Her husband has some sort of weird, indescribably evil sorceress illness. She gets presented with an opportunity to save him. So that was also an inversion. I didn't want a romance. I wanted the romance to be about the relationship already existing and fighting to save someone's life. And so that's what I did with this one. Rather than, the hero going and kind of gaining power. Now, this is a standard trope. She actually does that, but she fails a lot along the way. So it's kind of like the Hobbit, where like Bilbo just fails a bunch until he succeeds, and he succeeds with power once he gets the power. So there's a there and back again element to this. So that's not an inversion, but there's this inversion with those sorts of themes. And there's also the theme of change, right? And to me, this is a little more subtle, but it's not about change from one thing into another. It's about change from a fallen state into a more elevated state. So it's actually like a going backwards. Rather than like gaining power, you're actually gaining the power that you didn't know you lost through the fall of man, right? That stuff's kind of buried a little bit deep in here. But that's one of the big, those are some of the big themes that are in this, as well as a kind of failure, right? Is that what you are searching for, sometimes you're not going to be able to actually get it. And you're going to have to accept a lesser success, because that's the way that life works out a lot of times, right? It's kind of like how Bilbo could have like all the treasure, but he's like, I can't even carry it back. What was I thinking, right? Is that I can't even get all this stuff back again. So that started as kind of an inversion. Like, I want a female character and I want her to be married already. And I want that to be about saving the husband rather than the wife, which is what we typically see. And not so much like the man is a damsel in distress, but somebody who's seriously ill. And so going on an adventure to do all that kind of thing. And then, of course, you know, you have some animal companions, but they're really gross. Like, they're ravens that eat dead people. And, you know, there's some fun little things like that I throw in there as well. So, yes, inversion is a really good way to start with any kind of creative endeavor. The truth is, we're not creating whole cloth. Rather, we're taking what is come before and we're adapting it. We're trying to recombine it. We're trying to do new things with it. You see this with the development of music. If you're into popular music, it's like Pink Floyd did not come up with their sound out of whole cloth. They started in a rock and roll tradition that had developed up through the 60s. You know, starting with R&B. So it was a 20-plus year tradition, growing out of blues and growing out of R&B, growing out of early rock and roll. And they started with that as the base point, and then they changed a bunch of stuff. Same thing with like King Crimson or any of the British prog bands that you might like with Yes. Yes was like, well, we'll take rock and roll, but we'll add more classical stuff to it. We'll use classical forms. We'll use classical chords, classical guitar. We'll do different instrumentation. King Crimson, they'll have flute, mellotron. It's like, we're going to expand the instrumentation. We're going to expand the tonal boundaries of what we're doing. We're going to push the bounds of what we're doing and synthesize from outside. Bring in jazz stuff, bring in classical stuff in order to enhance the sound and create something that's new and original. That's all synthesis. So synthesis is a really, really popular one, as well as like inversion. If you think there's a book that's kind of popular now. I think it's called, or a fantasy book. It's about like the bar wenches in the inn, right? So what is that? Is that inversion? Well, it's kind of a recontextualization and inversion and kind of synthesis, right? You start with D&D fantasy, and then rather than having it be about the adventure, you're going to have it be about the barmaid. So it's same but different. And you can use this, by the way, to design a pitch, a log line, or a description for your book. Is same but different sells a lot of books. I have sold a lot of copies of Voices of the Void with it's Lovecraft meets Aliens, or Aliens meets Lovecraft. And whenever I say that to people, they're like, oh, I want to read that. I don't know where it is. I've lost it. I lost it in there somewhere. Who knows? Voices of the Void. Aliens meets Lovecraft. In fact, I'll link it. I probably just Googled it at this point. You can Google my books and find them. So check it out. Aliens meets Lovecraft, right? It's classic fantasy with a new twist. It's like, what if we had fantasy stories, but it was about the barmaids? What if it was about the innkeeper? That was a game, which was like, you have to stock an item shop. So how do you get your items? Well, you have to go kill monsters to get your items, right? So it's a little bit of an inversion of what you would expect. So you're taking something that's there, and then you are recombining it in order to be something new and original. So that's where a lot of inspiration comes from. I'd like to think of it as a seed that grows. So you have one idea, and then from there you can think of there's many ideas that can attach to that, right? So let's say if we're going to make a fantasy story, we're like, okay, we're going to make it from the perspective of the orc, right? So we're going to do an inversion. We're going to do an orc, right? And maybe we want to combine all three. Maybe we want to do sort of all three of these things to come up with a cool starting idea. So we'll start with the inversion. It's from the perspective of an orc. The orc is the main character, and he lives with the other orcs in the mountains, and they're super evil. Okay, so that's a good start. What if we do some synthesis in addition to that? Okay, well, it's a fantasy land, but also American Indians. Okay, well, it's orcs and Indians. All right, orcs and Native Americans, or we could do orcs and Aztecs or something, right? Okay, so what's the conflict? Well, the orc is trying to get the Aztecs to stop capturing goblins to sacrifice to their evil deities. So there you go. There's a conflict. And now it's a weird conflict, and it's a weird setup, right? But someone that's watching that will be like, well, that's a really good idea. That would be a really cool novel, and it would. And as I say it, I'm like, yeah, that would be cool. Like, we'll start with goblins, and then we'll have Aztecs, or like Aztec-derived fantasy humans or whatever, that are capturing the goblins to sacrifice them to like Tenochtitlan or like Xipitotec or whoever, right? So they're sacrificing the goblins to Xipitotec, and so we're gonna solve that problem. So we have a synthesis and we have an inversion. What can we do? Can we recontextualize something? Is there like a recontextualization that can happen with that? Well, now you start to get into necessary like meta territory where like the goblin is telling a story to a person in maybe, it's told to a person in a modern bar or something, right? And so there's all of history is wrong kind of thing that you could add into that would make it interesting if you wanted to try to go at that level. So you can do things like that, right? Boom, there's an idea. And from that seed, you have a lot of things. Okay, well, I'm going to imagine my first scene is going to be the goblin, and they're raiding people and they're going to go steal these people that are slaves. But it's a trap, and the Aztecs capture most of them and take them to go be sacrificed. And our main character, Gabo the orc, he sneaks in behind and watches them do the evil sacrifice to Xipitotec. And he brings this back, and that's why that's why the orcs have lost contact with this other orc tribe, is like they've all been sacrificed to Xipitotec and they're capturing orcs. So the tables have been turned. So how do we defeat the evil Aztecs? Well, first of all, we have to summon an orc god, right? You start coming up with solutions to the problem. We're going to summon an orc god, and we're going to make that orc god work for us. But they summon the orc god, and it turns out he's really evil and will just eat the orcs unless he gets human flesh to eat or something. So you start to think of all these little obstacles that can get in between them and stopping the Aztec gods. And then you find out maybe there's a reveal like the Aztec gods are, some other kind of ancient entity, and Gabo the orc assembles his party and goes deep into the pyramids to fight Xipitotec, and manages to like push him back into the netherworld or something like that. There's your like weird fantasy story. It's a synthesis and it's an inversion of a lot of things that you would think about. But from that seed you can think of a lot of really good ideas. So to me, one of the things that I have trouble with as an artist is not the inspiration part. Like, that's easy. I can come up with a million ideas. It is deciding which ones to act on, right? It's deciding which ones to do, right? Like that idea I just came up with, it's like, that might be the next live write project. That could be a really great little book to do for the next live write project. Totally off the wall, very weird. Would totally be one of those weird, unique books that people would like to read. So for me, it's really deciding like which ideas I really want to work on, because I have such limited time to do the actual work. This reminds me of something else with David Gilmour. So David Gilmour would talk about how he would record thousands of things on his phone, just as like voice memos on his phone. And I used to do this too. And he'd go back and listen to them. He goes, most of them, 90% of them are just rubbish. Like, I don't know what I was doing. I go back and listen to it out of the context of like, oh, this is a cool idea. And most of them are just garbage, right? But the 10% that are there, oh, there's something to work with. There's something I can do with that. And that's a really interesting way to think about inspiration too. He's just recording all the inspiration, all the ideas, all the seeds. And then he just picks the seeds that he thinks are best or that he's most interested in working on developing, and then turns those into full songs. And they work. All right, let me check out the chat real quick. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Are you a fan of the new Penguin show? Haven't watched it. Sorry. I don't watch TV shows usually, so just be aware of that. Like if someone asks, hey, did you watch the show? The answer is 99% of the time I haven't watched it because I don't like TV shows. Turning all the lore into a story. So glad project. Yeah, you got to have a story, not just lore. But the lore can be an inspiration, right? I mean, the lore could be, I have this idea for this magic system that's like that. It's like, okay, that's your inspiration. Cool. Now you have to actually craft it. You have to use your effort and your will and your knowledge to turn it into a story that someone else wants to read. So that means you're going to need setting, characters, and plot. You might have the setting part down, but you need characters and a plot. You have to have characters and something for them to do that's important. Then you're going to have an actual show. I haven't seen Rick Beato's interview of Bjorn Ulvaeus. I don't know who that is anyway, so I haven't seen it. Sorry. Bjorn's not on my radar. I don't know who that is. I haven't seen the new Penguin show. The only new show I've seen is Dan to Dan. That's the only new show I've seen, I think. I watched some of the Ron Mahaf remake, which is kind of a fun little silly show. And if in total 2024 fashion, Westerners on Twitter are trying to make it a show about being trans or something, because Ranma's cursed to turn into a girl whenever someone splashes cold water on him. And the whole point of that, and the author is a female, right? The original mangaku who made it is a female. She, I'm trying to remember, her name just fell out of my head, but she just thought it was really funny. It was like a good setup. That's the inspiration. It's a good setup for a bunch of hilarity. Like the setup is, what if you got transformed into a girl against your will, like whenever water splashed on you? What kind of zany stories would happen if you did that? And the answer is a lot. You could come up with a lot of funny stories. This guy's in love with your female form. This girl's in love with his sister's in love with your male form, right? You come up with lots of wacky little love triangles and stuff that happen with that. You don't want to be a female, but you end up gaining some of the female perspective against your will, which is something that happens with the characters. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with that. Dan to Dan is, what if a Gyaru and an Omega male had adventures together? Gyaru helps Omega male literally find his dick and balls. Literally. It's a great show, actually. Dan to Dan's a really good show. So it's like, what if we had, some teenagers doing ghost hunting, but one of them's a Gyaru and one of them's like an otaku Omega male. Boom, So a lot of these little things, they're just, what if we had this thing that we kind of already know and we're just adding new things to it until everything looks really unfamiliar in something like Dan to Dan, right? It's like there's ghosts, and the ghosts are not like the ghosts I've seen before because they're, synthesis of ghost ideas we've seen before. The characters are, character types we've maybe seen before, but in a context where we haven't seen them, and so they drive the story in different ways. And then it's like, what if we have a grandma medium, but we'll make her hot somehow, right? So that's like a little inversion there. It's like, oh, we'll have the wise old grandma Obi-Wan character be a hot grandma that like dresses kind of slutty. That's the idea. So you start with those ideas, and a lot of original stuff can come out of it, right? Yeah. Even if you look at something like Tolkien, who created his own languages. Those languages were derived out of things that existed in the real world that he was inspired by. And the lands and the people were derived out of things that he was inspired by, right? And this is why it's always hard to answer the question of like, what are your influences? It's like, I don't know what that means. I'm not trying to be anybody else. That's always like the thing that people tend to think with that. I've had this question asked a bunch of times with like little interviews, like, what are your influences? Whether it's my music or it's like the books or something, like, what are your influences? And I list things that I like. It's like with music, it's like, what are your influences? I'm like, yes, Bach, I don't know, Berlioz, Webern, right? Stravinsky, I don't know, what do you want me to say? It's like, my music doesn't sound anything like them. Why doesn't it? Well, it's because it's a synthesis of a lot of different things, right? So it sounds like Yes, or it sounds like David Gilmour in like one tiny area, because I'm not even actively pursuing like a David Gilmour sound or something with the guitar. I'm playing like me. But me, myself, I'm a synthesis of a bunch of different things that I played, right? I'm a synthesis. My style is a synthesis of all the things that I put into my brain and put under my fingers over the course of 30 years as a musician. So that it's always so hard to answer that. I think that's because a lot of beginning like guitar players, for example, they play other people's music. That's always where you start, right? And so they're like, I want to play like Kirk Hammett. So they go and they play all of Kirk Hammett's music. I want to play like, Yngwie Malmsteen. And they go play all of Yngwie Malmsteen's music, right? So it's like, my influence is Kirk Hammett. It's like, you're trying to sound like Kirk Hammett, but, at a certain point, you have to be you. You have to do something that's not Kirk Hammett, right? You can't just do variations of Kirk Hammett and expect anyone to listen to you. You have to synthesize something new. You have to find some other kind of inspiration. So it could start with like, what if I did Kirk Hammett, but like, I don't know, on classical guitar? And it's like, oh, then actually Kirk Hammett has done some classical guitar, but you get the idea, right? So that's always a hard thing for me to answer. So I just like list things that I like. Ooh, who's your influences? Ooh. I like a bunch of these things. I like Poul Anderson, and I like J.R.R. Tolkien, and I like Michael Moorcock and Robert E. Howard. I like these things. And it's like, well, are you actively trying to do that? I've only written one book where it actually started as like a synthesis on a specific author, and that was Demon Ex Machina, which was specifically there to start, like the starting place was Lovecraft's style. What if Lovecraft was writing in 2021? What would he write? Well, he would write like a story like this, right? He would still be concerned with the edges of what we know scientifically, and he'd be putting demons in there and aliens and monsters for us to consider. And so that's what I did with Demon Ex Machina. I'd recommend the movie Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz is really funny. The script's so tight, so many pays off, and it's got a good plot. Yeah. Any dystopian book recommendation? So the problem with dystopian fiction is that we live in the dystopia. That's why there's no dystopian fiction anymore. So if you just want the classics, it's going to be 1984. It's going to be Brave New World, Catch-22. Those are pretty classic staples of dystopian fiction. But you can also look at things like Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. That's kind of a seminal cyberpunk work, but it is definitely dystopian, so I would recommend that one. And it's got a great plot and a lot of interesting ideas in it as well. So Snow Crash is a really good one. I'm trying to think of any others that are like specifically dystopian. I don't know. You guys could probably think of some in the chat besides just like the classics. Yeah, I can't think of too many others like off the top of my head that aren't, something like, Hunger Games or Running Man by Richard Bachman, Stephen King. Right. So Running Man's a good one. Let me think if there's some others that I'm sure I've read bunches of these. What's an interesting one if you want a good piece of synthesis is I have it here. It's a Brandon Sanderson book. It's an interesting one. Dystopian Superheroes. It's called Steelheart. Here it is. Steelheart. Okay. This is a fun one. This is a fun book. It's not my favorite book because I'm not super into what begins it, like dystopian fiction plus superheroes. But that's what it is. It's superheroes plus dystopia. So that's a great idea of synthesis, right? What are we combining? It's this but this. It's same but different. It's this plus this. It's this meets that. It's superheroes meets dystopian fiction. That's Steelheart. Really good book. So if you're looking at something that's a little more action-packed and a little more heroic, about heroes really doing something, you want something that has that orientation. I think Brandon Sanderson does a really good job with this one. Sanderson is a really talented writer and is able to work outside the standard fantasy genres just fine, and this is an example. I think if he were to write straight science fiction, I think he would do a really good job of it as well. But he would probably do something that would be a synthesis. It's like, what if you had like Warhammer 40K is a synthesis. It's fantasy in space, right? It's Warhammer fantasy setting, but in space, and so you get lots of fun things. Elves in space, the Eldar in space, you could do that, right? Someone had suggested this, like, what if you took the elves from your story and you went way into the future, so you had these immortal elves living in a sci-fi setting. I'm like, that's perfect. It's like science fiction, spaceships but elves, right? But the elves are still around and there's magic. Boom. Boop, boop, boop. Put it all together. It's perfect, right? Are you picking up the Hello Kitty fuzz? I remember back in the day you had a video with the guitar. Yeah, I have a Hello Kitty guitar already. They came out with a new one, but I have the original, so I'll probably just stick with my original. The new one has a pink headstock. They also have a white version. So if I were collecting them, I would collect the original. There's a black variant of the original, black and pink, that's really cool looking, I think. But it's rarer and it's harder to find. This stuff used to be a lot easier to find. And so now they have the pink one back with a pink headstock, and then they have a white one, and the white one looks really good too. But I think if I were to buy another weird guitar, I would probably buy a Hatsune Miku guitar. That's on my if I were I'll show it to you guys real quick. I'll show it to you. The Hatsune Miku signature electric guitar is actually really, really good. The problem is if you wanted to buy the ESP version, it is very expensive. All right, so here's what it looks like. There's a couple variants, but I love it. It's like blue and black. It's got a good trim on it. I guess there's a grassroots version. So grassroots is like another one of ESP's brands, kind of like LTD. Here's the ESP one. I guess you could get the Miku Stomp pedal to go with it. I don't think that's a real one. There's a white one. Yes. This white and blue one looks sick. I would totally get this. This is just like an HSS Strat. Modern Strat. I think this is an Edwards. So yeah, Edwards is another brand. Edwards makes really good Les Pauls. So if you're looking for a cheap Les Paul that is really good, Edwards makes them. And you don't want to spring for an ESP. Yeah, I think this white one looks sick. Looks really good. I don't know if it looks as good as the original. The original looks really cool. I'd love to get a deal on one. And the thing is, it's kind of my it's my Meteora kind of upside down. It's a Fender Meteora shape, but a little bit different and just upside down, so that it looks more like an Explorer. So I like offset. I like the offset shapes. I just think they look really cool. And I bet this one would sit really nice in the lap. I bet it would sit really good with your leg here and here. because I always play in the middle. I play classical style. I don't play on my right leg anymore because I'm too big. I can't reach the upper frets like across my body very easily if I play like on the right leg. I don't know if anybody else has that problem, but yeah, I would totally get like this Hatsune Miku guitar. It's very inspiring. That's another thing too. Is like I think it's great to have good equipment, like good guitars and stuff, because they will inspire you to play, right? You will see a pretty guitar on the wall and you're going to want to take it down off the wall. This is interesting. That little detail. I kind of like that. Look at the little stripes there. It's kind of cool. Yeah, I think these are really cool guitars. I would totally get one. I don't think this is a real one. We want the one because it's unique. It's not just like they took a Strat and like slapped Hatsune Miku on it. They made a unique guitar for Hatsune Miku, and then they have the winter variant. The winter variant. I like the white and blue. I think the white and blue looks cool. I have a white and blue guitar. It's not. It's usually right here, but I guess it's in the other room right now. My Meteora. So I would want this one. Yeah, that's the one to get. Totally. Yeah. So anyway, like that's the if you have a great guitar and it's on the wall and you're gonna see it and you're like, man, I want to have that guitar in my hands. It's gonna encourage you to get it down and to play it. So if you're looking to get into guitar, man, put your guitar on the wall, put a hook up, hang it on the wall, and so that every time you walk past it, you're going to be inspired to play the guitar. You're going to think of an idea that you want to play on it. You're going to imagine yourself playing it, and that's going to make you want to get it down. The way I tend to play guitar now, just in case people are wondering, a lot of people, I don't know if you guys can see this, right? Point this down a bit. A lot of people play like this, like right leg. There's nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong with it. But for me to play up high, I have to reach all the way across my giant body to like get up there. Like this is pretty comfortable. But classical style, Dave Mustaine plays classical style, by the way. He just plays with the V. He puts the V on his leg and it's like, then like this, it's still very comfortable for me to reach to the first position. Just like with the classical guitar. But it's really easy also to get up in the, to get all the way up into the higher registers. Yeah. So anyway, that's the way I play guitar. And so I think that Hatsune Miku guitar would like fit really good on there between my legs. I don't know. What do you think of drug-inspired music, like how Grayson Slick wrote White Rabbit after a 3-day LSD trip, during which he listened to Ravel's Bolero and Miles Davis's sketches of Spain on a loop? I haven't heard this one, but the thing is like a lot of people make the mistake when they are thinking about drugs as like, I have to be on drugs to make music. And what you start to gather when you talk to guys who've done that, like whether it's them or it's like, guys from Pink Floyd or something like that, or the Beatles, right? It's like they're not rehearsing and working on the music while they're on psychedelics usually, right? They are the work and the effort part and the will part. The drugs tend to inhibit that. So you have to do a lot of work without, you can't be high on acid and be playing guitar usually and have it come out as coherent. Syd Barrett, of course, was incredibly inspired by LSD, but he also became a schizophrenic as a result of the LSD use. So I just, I usually caution people with that. Most people don't realize why musicians really do drugs, and it's not for inspiration. It's not to get the inspiration part. It's because you can't handle the lifestyle. You're asked to do very specific things as a musician that really don't go well together. So on the one hand, you have to be able to work and focus for long periods of time by yourself and be highly introverted, like practice. And on the other hand, you have to get out on a stage in front of people and be highly extroverted, connecting with other human beings and performing for them. So those drugs tend to be used to do those various things, right? That you might have heard it like, I got to do heroin to chill out. It's like, yeah, because it's so stressful. Or they do, they drink alcohol so they're not a nervous wreck. They smoke marijuana so they're not a nervous wreck. They do cocaine so that they could stay up all night gigging, right? Or like the Beatles did amphetamines and all kinds of stuff. Not because they needed it to be creative, right? But because they were gigging they were doing like 3 gigs a night in Germany, which is crazy. So yeah, they used drugs in order to sustain the lifestyle. So that's why musicians tend to get hooked on drugs. Is it's not because they need the drugs to be inspired to make creative music, right? As I just demonstrated, you can come up with incredibly creative ideas just by mixing 2 random things together. Famously, Jim Butcher wrote the Fury series, I think based on a bet of what they could combine, and it was like Pokemon and something else, right? It's Pokemon. I don't remember what it was, but it was synthesis. Pokemon meets this, and he wrote a whole series on it, and it was a hit, and it was really good. It's like, can you do that? The answer is yes. You can totally do that. So the idea that you need drugs to be creative, I don't think that's true. I think what most people don't understand is, especially not psychedelics, that's not what people get hooked on. They get hooked on the stimulants and they get hooked on the depressants because that allows them to operate as a musician a little bit easier. It allows them to perform. It allows them to deal with the anxiety. It allows them to focus, right? Why are musicians using cocaine in the studio? It's so that they can focus, right? They can focus really hard on what they're doing. Cocaine is a nootropic. That's the other thing too, when people are like, I'm taking these Alzheimer's drugs, this is nootropics. I'm like, why did you just take methamphetamine, man? Take Disoxin or Ritalin. Right? You're trying to force yourself to focus on something you don't care about. Like, there's way more potent drugs for doing that. The Nazis were on meth. That's very effective fighting force when you put all your soldiers on methamphetamine. Oh, thank you. Demon Ex Machina has uncanny parallels to Pickman's model. Yeah, the whole idea of Demon Ex Machina was really to emulate the style of Lovecraft in a modern setting, not so much to do like synthesis or the other kind of stuff that I tend to do. Yeah, I can't help it when I put a guitar in my hands and start playing. I do love this Parker Fly. This is like a really, really, really cool guitar. I think I'm gonna get a different strap though. Like, this strap has like one of these 80s sunsets on it, but it's like on my back when I play, so you never see the cool graphic. You just see like it's blue. I'm gonna get like an orange one or something for this guitar. A really light strap, like feather light is what I want. Psychopaths anime. There's a lot of dystopia in anime. Cyberpunk is a new one that's pretty dystopian, and it's pretty good. That Hideous Strength is a good classic dystopia. So That Hideous Strength is the third of the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. I recommend you read all 3 because they each have a really different flavor one from another. The first one, Out of the Silent Planet, he goes and visits Mars and has an adventure there, learning about this sort of planet that's at the end of its lifespan. Then the second one, he goes to Venus, and it's an inversion of that. So rather than the planet at the end of the lifespan, it's the planet at the beginning of its lifespan where there's a new Adam and Eve. There's an Adam and Eve on Venus. And it's like, what if you could stop the devil from causing the fall of man? And that's the story, and it's a pretty good one. Although that tends to be the more overlooked one of the trilogy, I think. And That Hideous Strength is a dystopian novel about basically what I would say is the tyranny of British bureaucracy. And we're seeing that today, right? The bureaucracy, there's a tyranny to bureaucracy where it just steamrolls everything. There's nothing you can do. In a polite society, you're used to the established courts and established systems in adjudicating your rights. And when they no longer do that, civilized people often don't know what to do. And so that is a really good exploration of those themes and those ideas and that hideous strength, because the heroes, if you will, tend to be civilized men, and what they have to do in order to overcome the bureaucracy is they have to resurrect a very uncivilized man. They resurrect Merlin, who's this druidic wizard, and it's the animals that undo the civilization of man. The horrible demonic civilization gets undone by animals, and by this primitive man, Merlin, this medieval man. So it's a really interesting, again, an inversion of a lot of things there. Psychopaths is like Minority Report, the anime. I liked John better than Akane, but both are decent. Yeah. 8 Man After is another dystopia. Akira is Akira. That's a dystopian for sure. Dystopian sci-fi. 8 Man After. So here's the thing. If you haven't watched 8 Man After, it's actually like a really classic cyberpunk story. It's from the 90s. It takes, and again, the inspiration is kind of an inversion, not an inversion, but kind of a recontextualization. The 8 Man was a animated superhero, Japanese animated superhero from like the 50s or 60s. We can even look him up. You can look him up on YouTube and see the original cartoons. They had some American versions called the 8th Man, I think. But they took 8 Man and said, okay, we're going to put him in a cyberpunk dystopia. It's 8 Man in cyberpunk dystopia, this but that. And they stuck him in there. And so that's, you end up with the almost the same story that you would expect from Cyberpunk 2077. That is the nature of these like cyborg parts causes people to go crazy. They go insane they have to take drugs in order to use the parts. They have to take stimulants. And so it causes them to go crazy. And so that's the setup for 8 Man After. But 8 Man is special because he has like a cybernetic brain. So because he has a cybernetic brain, he's not subject to like the cyber psychosis. Again, this was 1990s. It's a very old story. But if you haven't watched 8 Man After and you liked the new cyberpunk series, you should definitely watch 8 Man After. Okay. Put that up. What do you think of Berserk? I've avoided it because it was going on and had slow releases, and now the author's dead. But I keep hearing how amazing everything out so far it is. Well, it doesn't have a complete story, so you're not going to get to the end. I don't think you're going to get to Guts killing Griffith. So I don't know. You have to weigh whether I'm a fan of Berserk, but you have to kind of weigh whether or not you are willing to like have the incomplete fugue and enjoy it for what it is, and kind of think about where it was pointing to. They are making some after Kentaro Miura's death, but I am not inclined to read them. I'm not into separating the art and the artist like that, and I don't know. You can have a different opinion about it, but I'm okay just letting them be sort of what they are. If you are going to read them, I do recommend them in the deluxe editions because they're bigger, they look better. It's all the original, same translation, which is okay, and it's actually cheaper. You can get because one deluxe edition will have 3 or 4 tankobons in it, and so it's actually cheaper to buy the deluxe versions if you're going to collect those. And they look better and all that other stuff. So thank you for the super chat. Keep inspiring by example. I appreciate the super chat. To your point earlier on Good Gear, just got the Boss Slicer pedal yesterday, and really fun glitchy tremolo effects. Super easy to get inspired and creative with it. Yeah, I don't usually use pedals anymore. I run everything as software side. My pedal board, you can't see it. I think I've shown it before. My pedal board is like You look at it, you're like, what are those? Right? It's like a bunch of foot switches and a volume pedal and a wah pedal. It's like, I don't use like, I don't have all these pedals, right? I don't use that stuff. I run it all in software now. You know? So I just do things differently now. But yeah, it's inspiring. Same thing with like, you know, the I'm playing the Ableton Push, but you know, it's having it out. Just you get inspired to. Sometimes a patch will inspire you. You know, you get inspired hearing, and you can even, you know, maybe I want to change it a bit. We can. Change things up a bit. Let's do a slow attack. And do a fast attack. A little click there. I'm gonna do a slow. And do a little faster. Change the sound a little bit. A lot of stuff you can do with this. I'm gonna. Oh yeah, let's do this filter. Yeah. You can do something like this. Just that sound by itself, you can think of like, oh, this makes me think of like ghosts or something. Or I can do. Some ideas. 8-Man was noted by the RoboCop's maker. The guy who made RoboCop. Some guy who did Starship Troopers, right? Who created RoboCop? I now sound. Was it based on anything? And Paul Verhoeven. That's right. So 8-Man after is more like RoboCop but cyberpunk, you know. I guess it was an original screenplay. Edward Newmere. Yeah. Okay, interesting. I can't find anything where he mentions 8-Man. RoboCop it was originally came up with by the writer in like 1980 though, according to Wikipedia. So that would probably be what it was. But yeah, it does have like Judge Dredd, obviously Judge Dredd overtures. Starship Troopers was originally supposed to be just a bug hunt B movie, and they thought that it would do better if they got the rights to Starship Troopers, so Verhoeven just did it as Starship Troopers. And there's kind of a meta thing with Starship Troopers where it's Starship Troopers is the is the propaganda film. It's made as a fake propaganda film, right? So people are like, why is he presenting it as a utopia? It's like, because it's a propaganda film. So that's the meta layer there, is that this is the propaganda film you watch to get you excited to kill the bugs. We don't actually know what the society would have looked like because we're only watching the propaganda of it, right? All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you for the super chat. Sounds awesome. Thank you for always having these streams. You're welcome. Late to the party. Thank you, Sound Engraver. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. But yeah, that's the story of Starship Troopers. That's why, like, the people are like, it's a satire. It's like, it is, but it's really a satire of a propaganda film. So the whole idea is that you're watching a propaganda film and it's all fake anyway. That's why it's so silly. So I think a lot of people miss that about the Verhoeven work. And I'm not a fan of the original Starship Troopers book. It's not a book I like very much. I don't think it's Robert Heinlein's best book. And it's always like, people I think get obsessed with it because they like the idea of a like warriorocracy. They like the idea of soldiers being the only people with suffrage. That just appeals to people who are kind of we have kind of like a cult of the military, and so it appeals to people who have those sorts of feelings that like the only people who should have a say in society are the military men. It's actually an inversion of how it was in Rome. So in Rome, you could only serve in the military if you were eligible to vote. So only citizens could serve. You didn't become a citizen by serving. That kind of happened later, but not really. But instead it was you had to be a citizen in order to be eligible to join the legions. That's how it was originally for a long time. Again, so it's like a reversal of what a lot of people think. So I think that appeals to a lot of people, and they haven't thought that much about it. I don't like the original book. I've done videos on this on why I don't like the original book. I don't think it's a well-written book. It doesn't really have a plot. It's very much concerned with talking about its own philosophy, and I think that's why people think it's interesting, is they find the philosophy interesting. But I find the philosophy that underpins it to be not very thoroughly thought out. Just because somebody has signed on to be in the military doesn't mean that they have skin in the game the way that a person who owns land and is like doing actual production in society might. The other problem is that it's also backwards because you're assuming that restricting the franchisement to military people will improve society, but for that to function, then the government that's using the military needs to already be good, in which case the solution is postdating the solution of the problem, right? So you're presenting that this idea is like, this is a solution to fix our problem of a bunch of babies sucking the government teat. But in order for that to solve the problem, the government using the military has to already be good. The last 20 years of military adventurism should cure people of that notion, right? Is that, are individual soldiers who served in Afghanistan better than other voters? I would say so, but were they used well? And then as time goes on, in order for you to get citizenship, you have to already be agreeing with what the government is doing with the military. That wasn't the case for people in 2001. They were already in. But at a certain point, it's like you're buying into the conflict, which means the only people who vote are people who already at least tacitly, agree that what the government is doing with the military is good. In other words, you're not going to solve the problem because you are going to be filtering it only to people who already agree with what the corrupt government is doing. Now, will they vote welfare away from people who didn't serve in the military? Maybe. So maybe that would solve a problem. But the idea that it would somehow improve our enfranchisement problem, I think it's a little shallow. So I've talked about that in a couple of videos, as well as some of the weird things in the book. Like there's a strong Oedipal undercurrent in the book with Rico and his father. That's just very, I don't know. It's kind of ugly to me. I don't like it, and I don't know. It'd be hard for me to think about it in context of all the other weird things that Heinlein wrote. Like Stranger in a Strange Land is basically about the sexual weirdness that the entire sci-fi crowd was into in like the 60s and 70s, including like molesting children and things like that. So I don't know. I think Stranger in a Strange Land is an interesting book to read. It's better than Starship Troopers. It explores the ideas better, but its ideas are also on a bad foundation as well. People say that there's other services to be mentioned, but that's the only one that people focus on is the military. So that's the main one that I talk about, right? You'd be surprised. There's old people who have seen everything from Vietnam to Afghanistan who still think government good and wise. Yeah, that's true. I don't know how like being in the military is going to be a good or accurate civic filter. It could be one, but in order to enact that, you have to already have good people in control of government. In which case, it's not really a solution at that point. I thoroughly dislike Stranger in a Strange Land. I think it's well written, but I don't like the ideas that underpin it. I think it's kind of sexually perverted. But that's a huge obsession with a lot of the science fiction in the 60s and 70s was undoing social mores. It came from a place of like tabula rasa, like all of our inhibitions are imposed upon us, and what if they weren't there? Then we'd be freer and happier, right? No, I don't really agree with that. We actually had a fairly radical enfranchisement system during Reconstruction where Union veterans held a lot of political sway. I'm not an expert on Reconstruction, but I'm aware of a lot of it. There's still people who are upset about the way Reconstruction worked, Heinlein apparently pressured various of his male friends to sleep with his wife. It doesn't surprise me. That's the first time I've heard that, but it doesn't surprise me. But the whole scene was into that weird stuff, and that includes like child molestation. There's major child molestation scandals. You had Marion Zimmer Bradley, who abused her daughter, Moira Grayland, who wrote a book about it called The Last Closet. This stuff has come to light, but it hasn't been talked about a lot. I guess because people still revere a lot of these older science fiction writers, and they also like the idea of breaking down sexual mores because they want to I don't know. They want to sleep with a lot of people, I guess. They're interested in fulfilling their fantasies. Starship Troopers was a hard read. What did you think of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress? Okay, yes. Moon is a Harsh Mistress is a fun one. But again, that's another one that's got sexual weirdness, right? It's got like 3 men, like multiple men would share a woman. I think it's a really good, I think the inspiration for it's really good. Like, what if the moon rebelled, and how would you deal with that? And then it starts with an idea. If you had more men than women, how would the culture rearrange to have that? Now I had this. The reverse of that is in Prophet of the Godseed, where because of constant war, the male population has been decreased to the point where polygamy is normalized because it's the only way to keep population numbers stable. Is you have to have multiple wives because most of the men are dead. Most of the men are dead from war. So you have to have polygamy as a pretty normal institution. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to continue. The population would decrease too much. So The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I haven't read those in. I need to go back and read some of these. I haven't read them in years and years. I think it was a good one. So I'm just not a big fan of Starship Troopers on a technical level. I just don't like the way it's written. I don't think there's much plot. And then I think people like it because the ideas are compelling. And while I think the ideas are interesting, and I even kind of like the way he presents them, it's almost like a Socratic dialogue. I don't like the ideas themselves. When I think critically about them, I think it's probably a condition of like a post-war welfare society. I understand what Robert Heinlein was really thinking and talking about, but I'm not inclined to take his solution. Ray Bradbury was pretty normal. I hear that too, and also I heard people didn't like him. I heard other science fiction writers didn't like Ray Bradbury. Just, you know. Also, a lot of the older science fiction writers like Edmund Hamilton and Leigh Brackett, a married couple, and Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore. Yeah. I like Leigh Brackett's stuff. So Michael Moorcock also took down Starship Troopers. What did he call it? He wrote a long essay about why he hated Starship Troopers. But it's because he thought it was fascist. It wasn't because he thought that wouldn't solve the enfranchisement problem. The problem of the Republic is figuring out who to vote, who gets to vote, you know. I haven't read any Alistair Reynolds. I have not read any. It was wild reading the part in the Forever War where the guy comes back and they put in state-enforced homosexuality while he was gone. Yes. So this was a fun idea in the Forever War. Joe Haldeman wrote that. That's right. Okay, so I have to Google it. Who wrote this? And then so what happens is he's compelled to just go back into the service because by the time he gets back to Earth, it's just a foreign country. It's a completely foreign culture. Everything is alien. So we got to get back out into space. I just want to get off this planet. You know what I mean? My husband and I follow Bradbury's sense of pace and prose, one of the best writers out there for science fiction and fantasy. I like Ray Bradbury. I've only read a couple of his books, so I should probably read more of them when I get a chance. But I like Ray Bradbury. Who wrote Canticle for Leibowitz? That's a good one to read too. Since it's not. Walter Miller. So Canticle for Leibowitz is a really influential kind of post-apocalyptic book. It's a really cool book if you are into Fallout. If you want to see like the origins of a lot of the ideas in Fallout, then you should check out Canticle for Leibowitz. It's a cool book. That's another good one that I like. Another classic science fiction book. Kind of takes place in like 3 different little time periods, if I remember right. Kind of cool stuff. He finds like some hidden blueprints from before the nuclear war, and they treat them like religious documents because they don't really understand them. Yeah, the Forever War. That's an interesting one. I'm trying to think. Well, Ender's Game is not dystopian, but it has a good and interesting idea with like. No, I think again. I'm thinking of the Forever War. Ender's Game is good too. Ender's Game is a good one too. I think there's time dilation in Ender's Game. I'm trying to remember now. There's time dilation in Prophet of the Godseed. That's like a central part of that book. But anyway, I'm starting to run out of time, and my voice is starting to fail because I've been sick for like 10 days. So I need to kind of wrap it up and get ready to go. I really appreciate all of the super chats, by the way. I finished the first part of Needle Ash. It seems that the elves being away from their homes and working for foreigners as a distrusted wizard seems to be common. First with the Dark Elf Wizard in Crown of Sight, and then with the Merc Brother and Sister in Water of Awakening. Now Towler and Needle Ash. Do elves in Eternal Dream have wanderlust? Yes. So this is a great question. I love talking about it. The elves, they go in 2 directions, right? And so this actually in King Leopard, we get a little bit more exploration of what this means, and we get it from like Faralinda's perspective. One of our main protagonists, a couple of the main protagonists are actually elves in that one. So the question is, as time extends, you're kind of in between 2 bad places. One is the world is always changing and being reformed by the people that are in it, meaning everything that you loved about the world eventually gets swept away and destroyed while you remain, right? That's kind of a Tolkien-ish approach. That's why the elves are so sad, is like all their stuff is getting destroyed, right? But I have kind of the flip side, which is the elves, when they sequester themselves in hidden realms, they literally die of boredom, right? So they go into what they call the long sleep. They literally lay down and disappear, and they can return, right? They can be reincarnated in a sense, but because their incarnation is not like a separate thing, like they come back in body form too. So they enter what they call the long sleep, right? Which is like their mind and their spirit falls into despair. They lose energy for living. So the characters are going out to have adventures and to see the world, because the alternative is really to just decay. You just have to embrace that, and you have to have the energy to go out and form the world and be part of the world, or you will basically disappear from the world. And so different elves kind of take different approaches. So you see, like, the dark elves are the same. They're basically the same kind of elves, but they long for the world in a really ancient period, and so they sequester themselves in realms that they've created, basically created out of other realms like Niflheim, like the Mist Realm, to just allow them to persist with the aesthetics and the lifestyle and the feelings that they had before. Whereas the High Elves try to make new things, but they kind of fall into despair as they get older and older and things don't change. Elves lose the energy of life, the way that we would get old and kind of, old people are not interested in eating. Old elves, they start to lose interest in anything. Reproduction, things like that. All that stuff's explored a little bit in Alshafalda as well. And so you'll find elements of that, right? So they have to go out into the world and experience new and interesting things so that they can have the energy of life continue. So that's why they get wanderlust. They're bored. They're literally bored to death. So you have to go out and do something. When you're bored, you got to change what you're doing. Oh God, I just got inspired to write a story about state-enforced sex changes due to women dying out. So only rich men get real women, and the poor men get the change to keep them calm. Oh boy, that would be dystopian. I had elements of that in I'm going to write some more like little mini stories of live in the pod and eat bugs. It's a thing that's like only, you only get to date trans women. And all the real women have to shave their head unless they're a porn star. That was in it. Dies the Fire by S.M. Sterling is good if you want post-apocalyptic fiction in the Pacific Northwest. It sounds interesting to you. Yeah. Alistair Reynolds' Chasm City had a Pandora-esque setup where an amnesiac protagonist turns out to be psychotic villain of the past that murdered millions so he could succeed. That's a good setup. I think that's a good setup. I think that's a good setup. Yeah. Yeah, I like that setup. I think that would be a pretty fun one. Anyway, I got about 3 minutes left. So anyway, that's me kind of waxing about the different races. The different races, so if you want like the deep lore, you can find it in the Bright Children. I haven't linked my Patreon, but you can get the Bright Children on Patreon. You can just buy it if you want to. If you don't want to be a patron, you can actually just buy the book. Otherwise, it's not available. In fact, I can just link the book. Where's my products? Man, I gotta work better at finding this stuff. Shop. There we go. Bright Children. Okay. I will link this. So. There it is. So, yes, if you want, like, the origins of the races, it's just kind of different descents of man. Golden Man to Silver Man to Iron Man. Golden Man is like the race is originally conceived fully with its full power of creation. The race begins to decay, and so you get Silver Men, or like elves. They still have magic. They can still reform the world. They're immortal, right? Potentially immortal, at least. And then as people decay, they get more base, right? They lose the power of creation. They're no longer able to use magic. They're no longer able to reform the world. And when they do it, it's very slow. They have to do it with physical means. They have to shape rocks into shapes. They can't just conjure rocks up, which is what the original people could do. They could just think of a castle and make it, right? And you have the Drysen. There's also a couple of races like the Ebothin that I haven't really put in the stories yet because I wanted to start with really kind of classic fantasy that people like. Anyway, like the Drysen or the Orcs, they are people who have embraced the physicality. They've embraced being physical beings. And so they originally have like dark rites where they can put your soul back into your preserved body and you achieve immortality that way, rather than having your spirit kind of wander into the realm of the dead, wander to the underworld. So there's all that stuff is variants of how people fall and how they deal with mortality, good or bad, and how we lose, I guess, the likeness of God. Those are all plays on those ideas. So anyway, I'm about out of time for today. Let me, I'll put on some music before we go, and that'll be that. Turn on the desktop audio. I have a new one here. Okay. The Lingering Cold. Pull that one up. Yeah, all right. So that's it for this week. My voice is starting to give out. I'm still a little bit sick, but I appreciate everybody stopping by. I do appreciate the super chats. And I'll be back next week. Next week we're going to talk about one of the other elements. We'll talk about like will, or we'll talk about effort, talk about skill, one of those elements. I'll decide which one this kind of flows into. But anyway, we talked a lot about inspiration. If you're into science fiction and fantasy, that's where a lot of those things start with. But even with something like literary fiction, you may start with an inspiring ideas like, what if I wrote a story from the perspective of the servant or something, right? You usually start with what came before and you do things. Even with its style, something like James Joyce, Ulysses would be like, I'm going to write Odyssey, but with these different styles and settings. And that's the inspiration. That's the idea that starts it. And then you have to make that idea real, using your effort and your will and your skill. So thanks so much, guys, and I will see you all next time. Have a great day.